All right, so today we are diving deep into a place that's both incredibly beautiful and kind of stuck in the middle of a serious geopolitical tug of war, Georgia. You wanted to know why this small country keeps popping up in the news, and let me tell you, it's about way more than just peaches and cream this time. We're talking about a fight for independence, for democracy, for the future of a whole nation.
You see, Georgia's location has always kind of dictated its destiny. I mean, it's right there at the crossroads of East and West, which, historically speaking, has made it a pretty coveted prize, especially for Russia.
So everyone wants a piece of Georgia, but it's got its own unique culture, its own goals. What does that mean for the people who actually live there, trying to build a future when they've got this massive neighbor always right there?
That's exactly it. For centuries, Georgia was absorbed into the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. Imagine that pressure, always having your choices, even your identity, dictated by this much larger power.
It's like living next door to a giant. You can't help but be aware of it. And even when the Soviet Union collapsed and Georgia declared independence back in 91, that wasn't the end of it, was it? That's when things really start to get interesting, right?
Absolutely. The tension we see today, it really starts simmering then. Georgia began leaning west, seeking closer ties with NATO and the European Union. But Russia saw this as a direct threat.
Okay, so why exactly is Russia so threatened by Georgia wanting these partnerships? What's the bigger picture here?
To understand Russia's perspective, we need to think about their overall goals in the region. For them, maintaining influence over their neighbors, especially those who were formerly part of the Soviet Union, it's crucial. They see NATO expansion as a way to contain them. So when Georgia, with its history, makes a bid for these Western alliances, alarm bells start ringing in Moscow.
So it's like a power struggle with Georgia stuck in the middle. Sounds like that's going to create some serious tension.
Exactly. And that brings us to 2008, a year that really escalated the situation.
Yeah, 2008, that's when things really come to a head. Russia invaded, and they claimed it was about protecting ethnic minorities, but it was a lot more complicated than that.
Right. It wasn't just some abstract geopolitical move on a map. This was about real people's lives. What happened to the everyday Georgians caught in the middle of this? It was devastating. There was a real human cost. I read this story about a village where their church ended up on occupied land after the invasion. Now these villagers have to cross a militarized border every single week, risk getting detained just to go to church.
Wow, it's like, how do you choose between your faith and your safety? It's just heartbreaking.
And the thing is, it's not over. For those living near those occupied territories, the threat is constant. Imagine that, never knowing if your farm, your home, your whole life is safe. That takes a toll, living with that kind of uncertainty.
Absolutely. It's like living in the shadow of something that could erupt at any moment. And this kind of behavior, it feels familiar, doesn't it? Like we've seen this playbook before.
It does, doesn't it? What happened in Georgia, it has a lot of parallels with what we've seen in Ukraine, for example. This pattern of Russia trying to control its neighbors, redraw borders by force, it's become a real concern. And for international stability, it's a dangerous game.
It's like they're testing the limits, seeing what they can get away with. And for a country like Georgia, right on that edge, the stakes are incredibly high.
They are. And it's not just about military force either. Russia's playing a deeper game here, trying to influence things in Georgia in less obvious ways.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are some of those other tactics they're using? What does that look like? So we've got the military presence, the constant threat, but it doesn't stop there, right? It's like Russians got this whole other playbook trying to influence Georgia from the inside.
Yeah, it's a complex strategy. And one of the most worrying tools they're using is this foreign agents law. Now, on paper, it sounds harmless enough, like they're just trying to be transparent about foreign influence. But
In reality, what are we really talking about here?
it's about silencing dissent. It's about controlling the narrative. They're using this law to target independent media, NGOs, anyone who might challenge the Kremlin.
So if you're a journalist in Georgia and you get funding from, say, a pro-democracy group abroad.
You could be labeled a foreign agent.
Yeah.
Just like that. It doesn't even have to be a government, just any foreign source.
Wow, talk about a chilling effect. It's like they're trying to cut off any alternative viewpoints.
Exactly. And unfortunately, we've seen this kind of tactic before in other places. It's all about restricting freedom of speech, freedom of the press, under the guise of protecting the country.
A classic authoritarian playbook. It really makes you think about the future of democracy, not just in Georgia, but everywhere.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that through all of this, the Georgian people are incredibly resilient. They're determined to chart their own course.
So let's bring this home for our listeners. Why should we care about what's happening over there in Georgia?
Because what happens in Georgia doesn't stay in Georgia. If we just sit back and watch while international law is ignored, while a democracy is being undermined, what message does that send?
It sets a dangerous precedent.
Exactly. It emboldens others who might be looking to do the same thing. Georgia matters.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that freedom and democracy are fragile, and they need to be protected.
It's a story that's still being written, and we all have a stake in the outcome. If you were in the shoes of those Georgians facing down that kind of pressure, what would you do? How far would you go to protect your home, your values? That's something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's a story we'll definitely be keeping our eye on.